Hi, I'm Paul Rudalavage. Thanks for joining me to talk about traditions in work. My family, we're from upstate. If you live in Pennsylvania, you know that means Scranton area. 1964, my dad left his family's farm in Scranton to start his career. He left because there was an opportunity to work there. He settled in Philadelphia, and by the time he was 40, he had a successful career as an accountant and a wonderful young family. But there was something unsettled in my dad's life. He spent all day working in an office, but what he loved to do was to be outdoors growing things. I remember he'd come home from work dressed in a suit. He'd get so excited about gardening, he wouldn't even change. He'd just start walking around the yard, pulling weeds, until he had a clump of weeds the size of a beach ball in his hand. He loved to be outdoors growing things. That's what he did in all his free time. When he had even more free time, he would take our family, my mom, my older brother, and I, back to the farm where he grew up so we could experience growing things and being outdoors. That's what my dad loved to do. But being an accountant, he was also a very pragmatic person. And he knew something. He was certain of something. And it was this: there was no money in farming. But yet, that's what he enjoyed doing more than anything else, being outdoors and growing things. So for him, what was unresolved in his work life was a decision: the farm versus the office. Now, unfortunately for my dad, he never got to resolve that decision. When he was 42, he was diagnosed with cancer. And when he was 44, he died. Now I'm 43. When I turned 40, I also had something unsettled in my work life. Now, it wasn't between the farm and the office. I don't personally enjoy growing things. What it was, though, was a feeling. I couldn't really even describe the two sides of the argument, but what it was a feeling of uncertainty what I was doing, a lack of purpose and meaning in the work that I did every day. And I was getting frustrated. I was getting concerned because I was 40 and I was trying to figure this out. And I wish at that time that my dad had given me some words to help me through this struggle, this uncertainty. Have you ever blamed a parent for anything in your life? Kids do it all the time. Adults do it too. Me, I'd done both. But I was frustrated that I didn't have those words to help me figure it out. And I had my kids, I have my kids. I was getting concerned that I was falling short being able to pass that forward to them, to pass those words to help them in their life. And there were signs that I was falling short. I remember picking up my son, Connor, at the time he was 4 years old from preschool. And we're walking to the car together. And he looks at me and he says, "Dad, do you know what destiny means?" And I thought to myself, whoa, that's a big word for a 4-year-old. So I looked at him. I said, "Connor, I think I know what destiny means. Do you know what destiny means?" He looks at me and says, "Your butt. It means your butt, Dad." I don't know where that came from or what that means, but I was falling short. I didn't have the words for myself, for my own selfish reasons to figure it out, but I was also concerned that I wasn't going to be able to figure out meaning in work for my kids as well. What I didn't know at the time, though, was I was about to get some help from an unlikely source. See, my dad, he left the farm in 1964 because there was an opportunity to work there. But almost the same time, 1965, a man in Kentucky was making the opposite choice. He was choosing to return home to the farm. This man, an author named Wendell Berry, he had lived in New York City as a successful author, California, but he chose to return home to be a farmer, to work the land every day, and to continue writing about it. And he wrote about poems, stories, essays about the importance of agricultural life, the lessons there, that it was an important part of who we were. And in the 60s, he also wrote about and gathered his thoughts and research for something he was very concerned about. He was concerned that in our country, we were leaving the farm and it was changing who we were. See, my dad, he wasn't alone in leaving the farm because there was an opportunity to work there. In fact, millions of people in our country had done that over the last 100 years. In 1910, according to the Department of Agriculture, almost one half of all people in the United States either lived or worked on a farm. Fast forward 100 years, it's 1 out of 100. Millions of farmers were leaving their land. And Mr. Berry was concerned about this. And what he was concerned about was that we were focusing on productivity in farming and growing food, that all we were concerned about was growing enough food, and we were ignoring the way of life that we had created and those important lessons in that way of life. So he gathered those thoughts and those ideas and he put them together in a book called The Unsettling of America, Culture and Agriculture, which he published in 1977, coincidentally, the year that I was born. For the first 40 years of my life, I had no idea that that book even existed until one night, a little bit of destiny came into play. I was sitting on my butt, so my son Connor, maybe there was some foreshadowing uh, for him as well. I couldn't sleep one night. That's strange for me. I turned on public television. This time I didn't have cable, so I was relying on the rabbit ears. But for some reason that night, the signal was coming in strong. And I turned on the TV, and there's Mr. Berry showing his farm, talking about it, talking about the importance of agricultural life. And something clicked in my mind. I was like, whoa, farming, I had never thought about that. See, the struggles that I had in my work life from the ages of 20 to 40, like this wasn't a new thing at 40. It was going on for a long time. From 20 to 40, I was working hard and I was also reading and learning a lot. Reading books, entrepreneurship, business books, leadership, biographies, textbooks, self-help books. I'm reading all these books and I never once thought about farming, that there might be some lessons there that might help me out. So I scribbled the name of that book down, got it from the library, The Unsettling of America, read it, and it's totally changed my opinion, approach to work. So I'm going to share that with you today. And the key message in that book was that we were focusing on producing food, but not the culture, not who we were, not what was being passed down from generation to generation. So what was different about Mr. Berry? Like I said, I'd read all these other authors and I was studying them, but what was different about Mr. Berry? Well, three things that made him a different type of mentor, role model in my life. The first one is he told stories and gave perspective in a setting that I could identify with. The time that I had spent on my grandparents' farm with my dad, it was a setting that was familiar. So when Mr. Berry described something, those surroundings, those clicked with me. The words that he used as well. A word like manure. My dad, that he used cow manure to fertilize our garden. That was common. Barn, tractor, field, common words. Brush. I remember my grandmother, in her later years in life, she was always concerned that she got her fields cut in a timely manner so she wouldn't have brush growing up. So his lessons in that backdrop right here in Pennsylvania and those surroundings made sense to me and I could identify with them. Contrasting that, I had studied Steve Jobs, certainly a great leader, but he grew up in California, different weather, different climate, different surroundings. The neighborhood that he grew up in, everybody worked in electronics, computer science, and engineering. So it was a different type of background. And even though I read those things with Steve Jobs, it wasn't connecting with me on a deep level. The second way that Mr. Berry was different as a mentor is that he embraced physical work as necessary and positive. This is a new thing in what I had studied. And I also identified with that as well, because a pattern that I noticed in my life was that I did well, the jobs that I did the best at were ones that had a physical component to it. In my early 20s, I worked as a carpenter building houses, and I had the physical strength and coordination to work all day and do a great job. I had that physical strength. Other jobs after that, whenever it had a physical component to it, I did well at it. That was a talent. And Mr. Berry was saying, that's important. That strength of work is important. Not that we should just dig a ditch all day and not think about anything, but the idea that that physical work comes first and our education complements that physical work. The third way he was different was that he had worked decisions of a second generation college graduate. So Mr. Berry was a little bit ahead of his time in this standpoint. He was born in 1934, and at that time, he was born to both a mom and a dad that had graduated from college. So because of that, the work of the previous generations in his family, that had given Mr. Berry more opportunity in his work life. He had more choices, meaning he could have stayed in a city, California, New York. He could have stayed in Bennett Writer, or even when he moved back to Kentucky, he could have lived in Louisville, in the city, and in the town, and just ignored farming. But he had options available to him because the level of education um, of his parents, which was a great thing. But it also gave him a lot more decisions, and he had to weigh those options very carefully as he chose to return to a farm to his farm, to be a farmer and to write about it. And that's something for me, being a second generation college graduate. I've had more decisions to make, more opportunities in my life about work based on the level of experience and education that I have. And that's a good thing, but it's also a challenge sometimes. And what I'm getting at is that my dad had this debate in his life. Well, am I going to, the farm versus the office, growing things versus office work? What should I do? But I don't think it was a real decision for him. What I mean is that uh, he grew up in the farm, right? The family there, they grew their own food, they made their own clothes, and the extra food that they had, they would sell along the side of the road. They lived very frugally, and by doing that, they're able to provide for my dad to go to and graduate from college. So after all that hard work, for my dad simply to say, "No thanks, I'm going to move back home," it would not have been well received, certainly by my grandfather, and I think that's putting it mildly. So he didn't really have that option, but myself, I'm lucky to have those options, but they're harder to deal with. And if I think forward to my kids and generations, there's going to be more decisions. And we need, I certainly did, a stronger framework to evaluate these different decisions. So is Mr. Berry saying that we should go back to being farming and that that's the answer to everything? Well, I don't think so. When he says specifically, one of his talks I've watched on YouTube, not to quit our jobs and return to farming, but he wants us to think about the traditions and the culture as part of it, and embrace those. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. And the key message that I want you to take with me is not to agree with anything I'm saying, but to think about this decision that I believe we have to make as an important decision in our lives every day. And it's this, that we're faced with these two options in our work: tradition versus productivity. That's the main choice. And I just, as I'm speaking, want you to think about, is that really an important decision that I have to make? I personally believe it is. And I'm not going to be shy about saying which side I fall on it. But the key thing is I want you to think about that that is an important decision. So how do we define that? Because those are two kind of big words, tradition and productivity. Well, um, I've done 3 other videos so far. I've talked about them. I'm going to review them just so that we get a sense of, or you get a sense of what we're getting at. So the first, this tradition versus productivity, the first kind of sub decision is being a nurturer versus being a specialist. So a specialist on the productivity side would mean someone that becomes an expert in something, an expert in one thing with the goal of producing the most in that specialty. Versus a nurturer is someone that wants to get deeply involved in their surroundings so that they understand them and they're comfortable with them, and then they use the knowledge to take care of their surroundings and improve them as they're needed. And as I put these videos together, I've talked with friends and family members, and thank you to the ones that have contributed. I talked to my Uncle Rich. He's a retired physician, and he had that choice. He never really thought about it till we talked, but he had that choice in his life. He graduated from medical school, did very well in school. He could have been a specialist in medicine or a generalist, a family doctor. And he chose to be a family doctor. And he said it's one of the best decisions that he's ever made in his life. He got to know his patients more as they grew throughout the years, which was a benefit. Um, the other benefit was he was able to choose his work because he knew a lot, obviously, as being a doctor about medicine, but he could choose what areas with his patients that he wanted to learn more and help them more. And then if he needed help, he could refer them to a specialist. So that was one of those decisions. A second way that we can define this argument, tradition versus productivity, is about where we live. And our choices, we can either commit to a place or we can move often, living anywhere. And Mr. Berry pointed this out, and I hadn't thought about it before, but what he points out is the purpose of our education a long time ago when our land grant colleges started was to make us better workers in the state where we live. In other words, our education system would say, hey, if we need to learn about this particular aspect of where we live or this particular problem we're going to have, we're going to create our universities um, to solve that particular problem in our state. And over time, it's evolved where we're simply just learning on how to be productive, and that we can live anywhere. And this realization has been extremely powerful to me, and it's become one of the strongest parts of my marriage. That my wife and I, we agree that we want to live where the town where we are now in Ambler, not just for us though, but we want our kids to live there as well. And we talk about that a lot. And it's making us think ahead as far as how we're going to take care of those places, our place, and the impact of the decisions around our surroundings. Um, they mean more when you think further out in the future. The third way we can define this tradition versus productivity argument is regarding our work. We can say we can either choose work that you're measured on how well you work, or you can choose work where you're measured on how much you produce. And this key word is well in there, like working well. So I work in the construction industry, and it's stressful sometimes, not more or less necessarily than any other industry. But a construction project could take a long time, maybe a year or so. And what I've noticed sometimes, myself personally, I'm responsible for that, but a lot of times I see it in others as well, that the project is stressful for those 12 months. It's stress, 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 finished. And the finished product, the output, is often very, very good. But what's not is the daily stressful challenges that, in a lot of ways, I think are unnecessary. And if we focus on how well we work, meaning the actions we're taking every day, then we can improve that daily result and that daily mindset. And the fourth one, as part of our tradition and productivity, the one I covered today, is this about the opportunity to work, that we have a choice. We can choose the opportunity to work being more critical than output, or we can choose that producing output with minimum labor is the best approach. And and Mr. Berry shares some thoughts on this. He says in his book, The Unsettling of America, quote, as a people, we must learn again to think of human energy, our energy, not as something to be saved, but as something to be used and to be enjoyed in use. We must understand that our strength is, first of all, strength of body. And that strength cannot thrive except in decent, satisfying, comely work. Physical work, that work is the key part of us being strong. I remember being a little boy in my grandmother's kitchen eating lunch one day, and her brother was over. My Uncle Joe was over for lunch. And I remember he sat next to me and he looks at me and he says, do you want to see my muscle? And that was kind of a strange thing. I had never heard that from an adult, but he was right next to me, and it seemed like the answer he wanted was yes. So I said, okay, Uncle Joe, let me see your muscle. So he unbuttons his shirt and rolls up his sleeve, and he goes like this. and out of his arm pops this muscle. It was like the size of a grapefruit or a softball, just out of his arm. I'd never seen anything so big. And I remember I got home at night and I got in front of the mirror and I put my arm up in front of the mirror and I went like this and I flexed and I had nothing. It was flat. You could play pool across that thing. And I was so disappointed. But then I had an idea. I took my two little fingers and I took my flabby skin and I pushed it up. Now I had a big fake muscle. You ever tried to make yourself look stronger than you really are? Never goes well. But that was my Uncle Joe. That was his talent. His talent was his physical strength, and he's very proud of that. And Mr. Barry's reminded me that that's actually a very normal thing for us to want to feel that way and to do work that complements that. What we're saying when we talk about the opportunity to work is that the opportunity to work is the opportunity to be strong. As I put this together, and I've shared some family memories and members. I want to share my story in this because Mr. Barry says, "quote A healthy culture is a communal order of memory, insight, value, work, conviviality, reverence, and inspiration." So I want to share that. I'm going to focus on the first two words he said, the memory and the insight of what I've observed here in Pennsylvania and the work that I especially did in the ages around 25 to 30, because I experienced things a little bit different maybe than everybody in my community. Part of that reason was, like I did mention, that my dad, he passed away when I was pretty young, so maybe I didn't have as much direction. But at the same time, if I'm honest about it, I was kind of a know-it-all in my 20s anyway. So I might not have listened, but nevertheless, I went down a unique path, and I want to share that perspective if, so it helps share the memory and then a little bit of the insight. So what I'm getting at is this: with the opportunity to work, I'm going to give a little background and then my own personal story. So this is a photo of a bridge between Morrisville, Pennsylvania, and Trenton, New Jersey. It says Trenton makes on part of the bridge, and then the other side of the bridge it says the world takes. And that sign is a testament to the manufacturing power, not just of Trenton, New Jersey, but all the surrounding areas. And there's facts to back it up. According to a paper by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, in 1960, 40% of all workers worked in manufacturing in those towns. So that was in 1960. And again, what I want to share with this, I'm giving the background now, is what happens if we make that choice for productivity over time? What are the results of that choice since that was made in the past? And that same paper from the Federal Reserve Bank said that between 1960 and 1995, the manufacturing output of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware was steady, increased the same amount of goods. But we did that over time with 800,000 less workers. So the output we produced was the same, but 800,000 less workers in those three states. And now I'm going to share with you what I believe, from my experience, the results of that, of a lot less opportunity to work in those states. All right. So in 2001, I found myself in one of those manufacturing towns. I worked for a construction company. We built housing communities. And my boss said, I need you to go down to Camden, New Jersey, an old manufacturing town, go to one of our projects and do some paperwork for our job there. So I said, sure, no problem. I got my pickup truck and I drove into Camden and I drove to the construction site. Now, growing up in Philadelphia, I had heard that Camden, certainly on the news and things, that was going through some tough times, and there was definitely some problems there. But being there on the construction site, seeing the abandoned factories, it hit me at a different level. And the company I worked for was very successful, building houses and apartments for people of modest means. And I was in my 20s and I was motivated. I said, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing. So decided that with my brother and I that we would buy a house in a different manufacturing section of the town of Pennsylvania, West Oak Lane in Philadelphia. So we bought this little row home. Um, this is the house, and we decided the first thing we're to fix it up and rent it out, make money. That was our plan. First thing we're going to do was paint the house. So we're there on a Saturday. My brother's up on a ladder. I'm holding the ladder, and we hear this voice. Someone says, "Stop painting that house." And I'm looking around like, "What? Stop painting that house." I look around over my shoulder. I see this guy walking up towards me. He's walking like this. The best way I can describe him, uh, he looks like Kevin Hart. You know what Kevin Hart looks like, about the same size, same build, except he's bald. So bald Kevin Hart strolls up. He says, "Stop painting that house. Get off that ladder. I'm going to paint that house for you. I'm going to paint the whole house. You don't have to pay me $100. My brother and I'm like, whoa, like, wasn't expecting this today. So my brother gets down for the ladder. Uh, we introduce each other. Man's name, it says, my name's Jimmy. I just moved up here from down south. I'm staying with my sister. I need some work. Let me paint the house. And we said, listen, Jimmy, we don't want you up on the ladder. It's a little bit dangerous, but we do need the inside of the house painted. And if you want to do that, uh, have at it. We can work something out. And we did. We worked out a fair wage um, for him to paint it, and it turned out great. And we didn't have a lot of money. So why did we hire Jimmy? Like, we were on that real estate plan, the no money down with the emphasis on the no money. So why did we hire Jimmy? Well, for me, it felt like the right thing to do. But why did it feel like the right thing to do? Well, I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, I remember I was 13 years old and I'd finished up sports camp for the summer and wasn't doing anything. And my mom said to me, "Why don't you knock on Mr. Petnato's door? He's our neighbor a few doors down. He's a landscaper. See if he's got any work." So I said, "Okay, sure." So walk over, knock on Mr. Petnato's door. He answers. I said, "Hi, Mr. Petnato. I'm Paul. I'm your neighbor from a few doors down." He said, "I know who you are." I said, "Do you have any work?" He said, "Nope." I said, "Okay." I went home. Uh, about 10 minutes later, there's a knock on my door, and Mr. Petnato came back, said, "Listen," he said, "show up to my house tomorrow at 7, pack a lunch. I got some work for you." So for 2 weeks, I was a landscaper, got me out of the house, got me working, and that was a really good thing. Now, let me ask you, what if you knocked on a door for work and there was no work, and you knocked on the next door and there's no work, and you knocked on the next door and there's no work? What would you do? You may say, well, I would just keep knocking. I would keep knocking to the next and the next, and I would never quit. Okay, I don't doubt that. Have you ever been in that position? I know I haven't. I know I haven't. I know that work, uh, that opportunity has always been out there for me. And the insight that I'm sharing is that we need to think about work, or we have an option to think about work that allows us to give the opportunity to others for income. And we hear that a lot on the news, especially recently with job creation, and that's a good thing. But even a step further is to think about the opportunity for income for someone who just may have stopped looking, right? They might have temporarily quit their job search. Can we choose work that gives them the opportunity if they've paused their search just temporarily? All right, so the first house is successful. We were making money with that, and I decided that I was going to go get my real estate license to keep going and do even more. So I enrolled in night school in Center City, Philadelphia, and this was a little bit different. So I'm at school. Everyone from different sections of the city is there in this class, different ages, different races, different demographics. That was new for me. I was used to always being just in school where one age, pretty much just one demographic. So that was new. And part of learning in the real estate, certainly we did contracts and the law on that part, but a big part was fair housing. And we learned in that class the discrimination that went on um, in different neighborhoods and how that had such a negative impact on all these different blocks. And I remember learning that. It was just a little bit different now that I was in a class where we were experiencing people of every different race. So I got my real estate license and I got connected with a man that was buying houses at auction. Someone couldn't pay their mortgage, the house would go to auction. So he'd buy the house, and he used to call me right after the auction and give me an address and say, Paul, I got this house, South 63rd Street. Go take a look. Tell me what you think it's worth. Got on my MapQuest, went to the house, sized it up. But I remember one of the first houses was in Southwest Philadelphia. I never heard of Southwest Philadelphia. So I get my truck, I drive out there. I'm driving, I'm seeing abandoned buildings, abandoned houses. I was like, man, this looks just like Camden. I never even heard of it. Next month he calls me. He's got two more houses, uh, Hunting Park, Overbrook. Go out there, look at those houses. Cobb's Creek. I'm seeing all these different parts of Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, Gray's Ferry. Um, and I'm seeing these houses abandoned. And I was like, wow, there's so many more neighborhoods out there that I never even thought about that are like this. The other thing that happened, now I'm starting to get even more um, familiar, more involved in these different neighborhoods. If I would go in a house, see, like a typical row house is only 15 feet wide. And if you go in one of them and you open the door, the sound from the door, the people on each side know that someone went in. So I would go in the house, look around, take some photos of the house. And then when I come back out, there was often someone waiting on the porch for me. And the conversation often went like this: you guys gonna do something about that house finally? You know, the roof's been leaking. It's been leaking into my house. There's bugs crawling through the wall from that house into my house. There's mice living in it. And yeah, for 5 years. And the person I worked for, he was a good man. He took care of that, but that didn't fix the 5 years where someone had that stress from living next to that house, that row house. That was a problem. Kept going, buying and selling those houses, or supporting that person that was selling those houses. And I'm getting even further, getting to know people. One of my tenants for a house that I owned uh, needed to re-sign his lease, re-sign some paperwork. So I'm in the kitchen and I have the paperwork and I give it to him, and he's starting to sign the paperwork, and he's signing really slowly. And he stops for a moment. He looks at me. He says, "You know, the reason I write so slowly is that I'm actually left-handed. But my dad thought it'd be weird for me to be left-handed, so he insisted that I write with my right hand." So, what does that have to do with work? Well, I know for me personally, I'm a much more patient and kind father when I've had a good day at work. And I wonder if we increase the opportunity to work, that good work, people working well, that could make those roles as a parent just a little bit easier. And thinking about someone that's in a row house with the one next to it that's vacant, that's leaking, that if we had more opportunity to work in our community, that would relieve that pain and that stress from those people's lives, from those neighbors' lives. And I think that it could. So we can choose work that gives others the opportunity for peace. So now, um, getting more involved. I need a painter to help me out with these houses. I find a man. His name's John Tucker. You can always kind of tell how nice someone is by their voicemail, or back then their answering machine. John had just the nicest message. He would say, "Hi, this is John's Wallpaper and Company. Please leave me a message. I hope you and your family are doing well." And he really cared about that. He was always asking about my family, and as I got to know his a little bit, I never asked as much. Unfortunately, I was a little self-involved, but the little bit that I did learn was he had 9 siblings, and he was from down south. And the whole down south thing was kind of strange. Like, I didn't understand what that meant at the time. And I would meet some other ladies while I was on the porch, different porches. I'm gonna change my earbuds here. That they were from down south too. It was just something I noticed, and I didn't quite figure it out. Anyway, so I had John Tucker was doing the painting, and I needed a plumber. So I went to the supply house and told him what I was doing, and said, "Could you recommend a plumber?" And they gave me the phone number of a man named Bob Laster. So I called Bob up. Came out to this house where I had to redo all the plumbing. He shows up on time. It's him, his helper Mike. They size everything up. We come to an agreement. He shows up exactly when he said he was. Gets to work. Beautiful work. get a timely bill. It's like, wow, this guy's amazing. So I hire him for the next house. Same thing. Just shows up on time, beautiful work, both of them, happy to be there, great attitude. And the next house, I was like, man, these guys are great. So as I'm getting to know them after a few months, one day we're in the kitchen of a house, and Mike, the younger apprentice, says to me, "Hey, Paul, how old do you think Bob is?" I was like, so I looked at Bob, and he was very strong. He was definitely strong. I looked and I said, I don't know, probably maybe 50, 55. Bob has this big smile on his face. Mike goes, he's 75. I was like, what? 75? Showing up to these houses every day with a great attitude, doing the plumbing. Like it was amazing. Um, I remember bought this house, or my customer had this house. This was in Southwest Philadelphia too, and it needed to be sold. And someone had tried to patch all the pipes with concrete, which is not the way that you patch pipes in the basement. I said, Bob, can you take care of this? He said, he said, sure. So he and Mike went out there taking care of it. I went out to check on him, and I go down to the basement, and they're just with sledgehammers, just banging on these pipes, breaking the concrete piece by piece. I said, Bob, how long been doing this? He's like, oh, we're doing about 3 hours. I was like, whoa, 3 hours. And he smacks it again. And he stops, looks at me. He goes, this is some tough ass shit. And just keeps on smacking. Big smile on his face. Imagine that, 75 years old, the amount of joy that he had. And that insight that I have is that the work that we choose, it can give somebody else the opportunity for joy. And Bob certainly had that, which was pretty neat. Um, all right, so I'm still in the city. I'm getting um, all these different parts of the city, meeting people, houses, the whole deal. I live in Mount Airy at the time, and I meet some folks that look at some houses in Mount Airy, and they said, Paul, we're more West Philly folks. We'd like to look at some houses in the Overbrook section. I said, sure, we can do that. Um, so I schedule some appointments. We drive over, we get out in the block, and I can see the for sale sign up front. I'm walking up to the house, got my papers like this, and I see a lady get off her porch, and she starts walking, down off her porch, and she starts walking towards me. And as I'm we're going to meet like right here as I'm about to go up the walk to the house. We meet right here, and she looks at me and she says, when I moved on this block in the 60s, this was the nicest block in Philadelphia. And we were the first black family to move on this block. And after we moved here, all the white people got scared and moved away. And now look at it. And I looked around, and it didn't look very nice. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't say anything. Um, I didn't say anything. I never forgot that. At the time, I was I was self-involved. I was not very good at my job. Uh, the houses that I bought to rent, they weren't very profitable, so I had my own concerns that I was trying to figure out. But I never forgot that until recently. And see, after I got introduced to Mr. Berry through that one night in Destiny, a few months later, I committed to my work that I was going to serve God every day in what I do every day. I was going to figure that out. I was going to figure that out. And as I've tried to figure that out, I had to relearn some things. And one of the things I relearned was what it means, the story of a good Samaritan. See, I always thought that was about someone that needed help along the side of the road or across the street, and it is. But what I didn't know was the purpose of that story. It was to teach us who our neighbors are. And to me, that means that we're all connected. See, remember Mr. Tucker? He was from down south. Jimmy was from down south. These other people from down south. I never understood that until I learned recently that as black farmers were no longer needed in the South, they moved north to the factories, to work in the factories. And my dad, because there wasn't an opportunity to work in the South anymore, my dad, he left his family farm and he had moved south because there was no opportunity to work there. And my mom, her parents, they were factory workers in Scranton, and she moved because there was an opportunity to work there. And what I'm saying is, we're all farmers and factory workers. We're all farmers and factory workers if we choose to accept that as our common identity. We're all there to accept that as our common identity. If you like country music, there's a song by a band called Montgomery Gentry. It's called My Town. One of the lines in the song says, "There ain't much going on here since they closed the mill." We're talking about the factory closing. And if you like rock from the city, you might like Bruce Springsteen. And he has his song called My Hometown. Lyric goes, Foreman says these jobs are going, boys, and they ain't coming back. It's the same story from the farm to the factory. We have that as a common identity if we choose to accept it, the common identity in our work. So how do we make that choice? That's always a tough part, right? What do we do? Here's 4 quick things that I want to share with you. The biggest part is that we need to look within ourselves, but certainly our own industries, to find ways that we can give others the opportunity to work for the benefit of everybody. So if we look at income, by industry, I sell lighting control systems. One of the biggest benefits of a lighting control system is it saves energy. So we can hire people locally to do that kind of work. According to the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, if you invest $1 million just buying your energy normally, it creates 10 jobs in the economy. If you invest that same million in energy efficiency, it creates 20 jobs. We can do that. I've personally been involved in projects, whether it's a school gymnasium, an office building. We can make those investments that give us opportunity to work. I've seen it happen. We can choose work that gives others the opportunity for peace. Like I mentioned, the construction industry is stressful sometimes. Last fall, I led a little study at our office, a competitive analysis to the different products, that we sell and then our competition. And I didn't think about it at the time, but as I reflect on it, the best products are the ones that are low stress, that give people that sense of peace in their day. That's really what's important. A lot of times we think, especially when we work with engineers, what they're thinking about, what can the product do? What can it do? And that's important, but I think more importantly is what's the work? Can the work give someone peace in their day? The third choice, we can choose work that gives the opportunity for joy. When I think about Bob Laster, the plumber, and the joy that he had, see, it was a cool thing. Bob, right, 75-year-old black man, his apprentice, Mike, 25-year-old approximately, I'm not sure, white man, the two of them working together, enjoying their work, learning from each other. It was a beautiful thing. But sometimes, like, what if someone had said to Bob, listen, you just work the security desk, you just take out the trash, you just work the loading dock. He would never had the opportunity to be a plumber, to learn that, and to experience that joy. I don't have all the answers for that, but I think if we put our heads together, we can figure them out. One of Mr. Berry's phrases that I adopted is the idea, what he says, I just want to get a conversation started. And that's my goal here today, is to get a conversation started in what we do. And the last one is we can choose work that gives us a common identity. There's a difference between being a coworker and working together. I experienced that recently. One of my coworkers named Brian, we've been in the same office together. We've talked a lot over the years, but a few months ago, we ended up in someone's house, one of our fancy lighting systems. We had to program 100 light switches to work with an app and get them all to work together. And it's the two of us, all these switches, and we've got to figure it out to come together. And when you're actually working together, what happens, what I've observed is you quickly see All right, your flaws are very evident very quickly. Mine certainly are. I'm not that organized. That's a challenge for me. But you see each other's flaws and you can quickly work through them and support each other when you actually are working together for that. That we're connected, we're humbled by our flaws, but we're also connected in them. And doing that visible work together is the most important thing to have our sense of common identity in those traditions. Thanks for watching as I shared these memories and the insight with you, and I would really enjoy hearing from you. Thank you.